yeah, this is just a brief overview of how we'll be proceeding through the next 2 hours together. All of this information is recorded, and we will have time for questions at the end. You're welcome to drop in questions in the chat during the webinar that we will prioritize first at the end, or you can use the raised hand feature to ask that question during the question portion as well. So this is a general timeline of our speakers who we're very thankful to have today. We'll start with Tara Greiman, who leads the Department of Conservation and Stewardship at the Farmers Union. And she'll be going over an introduction to provide just a very general understanding of the grid and the distribution of utility aid in Wisconsin. Then we'll move to Jesse Bradish with UW Extension, who will provide an overview of the Public Service Commission and their approval process for renewable energy projects. Next, we'll have Tim Steiber, I believe, but that may be wrong, the Land and Water Conservation Administrator in St. Croix County. And he'll discuss the soil and water general background and impacts on the county. We'll then have Chris May with the Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, who will share about the local economic impacts and benefits of these projects. And next, we'll have Mike Graham, who has an extensive background in rural economic development and the process of forming community benefit agreements. And finally, for the agrivoltaics portion, we'll share out the possibilities that solar projects can have in land maintenance and partnering with local farmers. And for this, we'll have both Mary Beth Barker, who works in land stewardship at One Energy, and Bo Stafford, who's a farmer that grazes his sheep under multiple solar projects with his farm in Wiscovery Grazing in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. Yeah, and then we'll finish with Tara leading questions that are in the chat or that you can then ask at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Tara.
Thanks, Maddie. All right, I'm going to share my screen here real quick and hope that everything works. So if you can give me a verbal that this is showing first and second slide, great. Okay, I'll dive right in. So my name is Tara Greiman, as Maddie said, the Director of Conservation and Stewardship. I've been with the Wisconsin Farmers Union for coming up on 5 years now. And starting during the COVID times, I have been organizing in the St. Croix County, Pierce, Polk, and Dunn County areas with farmers on water quality concerns. So you may have seen me at some community events talking soil health with our Soil Urundi's program. You may have seen us at pasture walks, all sorts of stuff that we do. So I've been really following the St. Croix County water quality considerations and have been very closely following this 10 Mile Creek solar conversation. I've spoken with Aaron Prairie Township a couple of times, been watching along with the community county board meetings, the community development committee, and what's going on there. So I'm really going to try to give folks just an overview of what's going on with this project, what we know based on publicly available information, and then why and how this project is happening. So number one, I'm just going to cover the very basics of the grids, why solar in Wisconsin, the considerations that the community is making in this conversation, and then what we know. So I have to go really fast because I'm short on time. So very basics of the grid. Here is the makeup of Wisconsin's electricity portfolio up to 2024. So while we're talking about this, it's important to note that coal is declining because of its increased costs. Natural gas has actually been the lion's share of the portion of our electricity use for quite some time now. And you can see here also that nuclear has been pretty stable, although in our Wisconsin portfolio it has dropped with the closure of the Kewaunee power plant. And then renewables, in this it says wind and solar when they're talking renewables. You can see that those have been increasing steadily since the early 2000s. And that other down there, I'm going to go ahead and guess is hydro, which again, many people would like to put with renewables. So this is the general portfolio that we're working with and when we're talking about electricity grid in Wisconsin. So the question I get when people have called us about this and when I've been in public meetings, the first two things that people say is, why would they do that in Wisconsin? It's not economically feasible and it's not physically feasible. So first we'll talk about the economics of why Xcel Energy is talking about this along with many other energy generation companies. So this here is a graph from the Lazard publication that came out in 2025 with the levelized costs of energy comparison. This study, Lazard is an investment firm that did this study. And as you can see from the graph, solar, utility scale, and onshore wind actually come in the lowest in terms of cost for built generation facility. And then combined cycle gas is down there at the bottom, and you can see that actually comes next in terms of capacity. So that actually makes, when we're looking at an increased need for generation and when we're offlining coal, it actually makes solar and wind the cheapest options right now. And I should note, we do get a lot of comments from people that doesn't work without subsidies. Lazard actually did this without taking into account any of the federal or statewide subsidies anywhere. So this information is just based on the practical considerations. The other thing that was noted in this study of real importance is that for wind and solar to get online, it takes 1 to 2 years if you're moving really smoothly. For a nuclear or gas combined cycle plant, those can take 5 to 10 years based on the permitting needs and construction. So that's another consideration as we're looking at an increased demand or just trying to cover gaps. So the other thing is physical feasibility. So the next thing that we all think is it's really cold here. Obviously, we shouldn't do solar energy. And if you look at a map of the irradiance of the United States, you can see that, yes, the Southwest has so much more irradiance. Let's put it all down there. And this map here is from MREA. They did a rooftop solar presentation for our members a while ago. They shared this, and conveniently they put Germany there in the lower right-hand corner so that you can see the average irradiance of Germany. I am very German, and you can see from my pale skin, Germany does not get a lot of sunlight naturally. However, they still actually use a relatively large portion of their energy portfolio in gigawatts of solar generation. Having flown over Austria and Munich, I can also say they do very much utilize a lot of solar there. So the next question is, why say Croix County? And the answer to that, mostly according to Xcel Energy, is because the King coal plant is shutting down. So the King coal plant is located in Stillwater. You guys probably recognize the smokestack when you drive across the river. That has been running since 1968. It had its own big battle when it was formed, and it's getting pretty outdated and expensive to run. So since 2020, they've actually started running the plant just half the year, according to their own reports back then, because it's so expensive and slow to get started up. And obviously, the community around it is not insanely in love with the pollution factor around the King coal plant. So that is important in terms of the solar conversation because of the Mid-Continent Independent Operator System. Sorry, system operator. We in our grid exist in MISO, which their job is to make sure that enough electrons are on the grid when we need them, and those electrons get to where they need to go. So it is astounding to me that I've grown up in America. Now that I think about the grid, I have never plugged in anything or flipped a light switch and thought, oh, it might not work, right? They're actually doing a very good job in terms of ensuring that we have reliability. The only times in my life when things have not worked, it's never been a generation concern. It's been a transmission concern, right? And so MISO does a pretty good job in terms of ensuring that we have reliability. Their second goal and mission is to ensure cost effectiveness of the infrastructure. And the other two, they enable competitive markets and they allow for competition. Those both follow into the cost effectiveness to protect the consumer. Because our utilities have geographic monopolies over infrastructure, we want to ensure that there's something like MISO that ensures that the consumer is being protected. So that is their role. What they say is if you take a generation facility offline, you have 3 years to use those same lines before you no longer have first right to them. So Xcel Energy is planning to decommission the King coal plant in 2028, which gives them until 2031 to try and get generation capacity and electrons back on those lines. So that brings us to 10 Mile Creek. So according to Xcel Energy, from what they posted on their website, they're retiring the plant and they want to build 300 megawatts of solar energy right now and 300 megawatts of battery storage. That's going to cover 2,980 acres for the solar. And then they have to get that back onto transmission. So it will take a 17-mile transmission line, or you have to put 2 options to the PSC. So that the next one would be 19 miles. They have reported that they have plenty of acres that they have contracted with farmers, so they could go up to larger scale or they could have flexibility within that. The next thing to know is that for me, as a soil health and farming person, and who's been really concerned about water quality for the whole time, the vegetation management plan They've said that they've offered right of first refusal to landowners, for a couple of landowners, to maintain the management how they want. And they have also referenced the Share Coal Solar site, which is in Cloud, Minnesota area, which they also operate now. And those have pollinator habitat, and I've been told that there's grazing on that site, although I haven't been out there. And when we've asked for specific details on planting mixes or what will be planted in there, they've said we're still in the planning process. You can look at the basics for there will be vegetation under here. So to me, that's really important to know the vegetation piece because I'm a soil person. So really, really quickly going through what I hear in terms of the anticipated costs and the anticipated benefits of this. So when people call me to talk about this with concern, one of the big things is the farmland change. There's a concern that, you know, if we're not growing crops, we're not growing food on that, this land will be taken out of production, and that doesn't feel good to people. There's a real concern about the resilience of our food system. The next one is the aesthetic change. People didn't move to Hammond and Aaron Prairies to look at solar panels. You know, they went because they wanted to see the corn and the farmland. There's concerns about the impacts on water quality. There's real concerns that have been brought up about the safety of battery storage, which is a very quickly changing technology and a very new technology. So we see a lot of people learning rather quickly on what the best practices are, but we're not positive on what those are yet. The next one is the noise of installation. So if you look at the last photo, you can see there are I-beams that have to go in the ground for every couple of panels. So that's going to be tens of thousands of posts that get pounded into the ground. It's loud, and it's loud for a while. Other concerns that get brought up that we have talked to the DNR about are fencing and wildlife concerns. When you have 2,980 acres of fenced land, that's going to have an impact on wildlife corridors. There's soil quality impacts during and after construction. And then there's also the burden of decommissioning. So we have to ensure that if something were to happen, a company wouldn't be able to cause, you know, like it happens with mining or with coal companies, they just say, we're going to do something, and then they go bankrupt and they don't do anything about it, right? So there is a protection against that. The next category here is the anticipated benefits that we hear from people. So one that gets brought up a lot, especially by folks around the state who are in local government, they'll talk about utility aid revenue. So Wisconsin, we actually pay a higher utility aid payment for renewably generated energy. So that's $5,000 per megawatt. I used the tax calculator that came out of the University of Michigan that was specifically created for Wisconsin, and that comes out to $1.4 million a year just for the solar. We don't have a tax code yet for this battery storage, but that might be coming, so that might increase. So that 1.4 million gets split partially to the county and then partially to Aaron Prairie and Hammond townships. The other thing that's a benefit, of course, to the farmers who own the land, who are renting it out, is that the lease rate that is being paid by Xcel Energy is significantly above the crop and pasture rental rate averages in the county by a lot. So it's a real boon to farmers who can stabilize their income in what are really, really hard farm markets right now. Another thing that we hear about is increased energy resilience, as we are seeing everything split up and significant concerns in the Middle East and a lot of our production facilities. Energy resilience comes up from the Department of Defense, but as well as local residents who want to know that we have a stable energy thing that comes with no fuel shipping requirements. There's folks who have been concerned about the reduction of pollution from living next to coal plants, and a lot of folks would say I'd much rather have wind turbines or solar than I would want to have a natural gas peaking plant around me. And we hear that from folks as well. There's concerns, or actually there are people who think that the impacts on water quality will be improved. And then there's some folks who say they would rather have a quiet neighbor than a housing development next door. So we do see those as well. The other thing I want to throw in here is the other anticipated benefit that we at the Farmers Union always are trying to push is benefit negotiation. And Mike will talk about that more later. One other thing that's coming out of all of this, despite whatever happens with it, I think is community organizing strength. All right, so here are the maps. You can find these online of where they're going to be. As I said, these are in rural Aaron Prairie and Hammond townships, but 10milecreekproject.org has the specific maps if you want to see more. And then really, really quickly, I want to let you guys know where we're at in this process, because Jesse's about to go through the PSC process, and I want to let you know where we are. So Xcel has filed some very early pre-application documents with the engineering plans available. And these are linked here, but you can find them if you Google them. Like I said, they're not in a hurry, so they have already pushed back their application a couple of times for what they said they would start the application They're also in the process of negotiating what's called a joint development agreement, which are kind of common, becoming more common around the state, which is where local townships and counties create a contract of operations for, like, here's the highways that you're going to use, here's how you're going to put money into escrow to make sure that you can decommission this thing correctly, here's all these other safety considerations. And so the county has been taking public comments for a while, and they've been working with Atoli's Law to rewrite a draft that they just published in February. I want to make a note that this is not a free process. So right now, Atoli's Law's bill to the county is $30,000. The St. Croix County Board of Supervisors also voted for the county to serve as an intervener in the Public Service Commission for the process. So that will also create legal fees, but it is a way for the county to intervene. They have not been clear on what they are going to say in the intervention, but it's a way for them to be legally represented at the PSC process. So Ken Witt, who's the county staff at the county, I should say, said we're doing both of these. The intervention is to go to the PSC and affect the process there. And then also we're doing the negotiation, the joint development agreement, as a belt and suspenders kind of approach. All right, so thank you for putting up with all of that. I flew through that as quickly as I could so that we could get to the other great speakers, but I hope that does some context setting.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara. We're next moving to Jesse Bradish, the Renewable Energy Specialist with UW Extension, to share background on the Public Service Commission and the application process. So take it away, Jesse.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. And thanks, Tara. So like Maddie said, we'll talk about how the PSC does siting of these large-scale projects. So many of you may already have been following along with your options to engage about 10 Mile. Local communities can, first of all, always give input through the public comment periods. There's also going to be a public hearing. I'll have a chart and a few slides that will get into that in more detail. And the PSC will consider documents that have already been published, including comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances. So if there is an environmental, safety, or planning concern that has been adopted in a comprehensive plan or ordinance, that will be considered by the PSC as well. So the Public Service Commission does a lot of things. They don't just manage energy generating facilities. They have other kinds of utilities like natural gas, water, and the phone service that they regulate. And they're responsible for any energy generating facility, not just renewable energy, over a certain size. So to apply for one of these large scale projects, it's called a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or a CPCN. And that's required for anything over 100 megawatts and also for high voltage transmission lines over 100 kilovolts. And so there are a few considerations by the PSC. The project has to be in the public interest. And so as a result of the public interest, as Tara mentioned, I'm used to turning my lights on and having electricity. So electricity is definitely considered a public interest. And so if there are zoning regulations in a local community, they can be preempted by the PSC, something to be aware of. And the other thing is that they are time bound. They are required to complete their review within 1 year from when a completed application was submitted. So once it's confirmed it's completed, you can expect that the decision will be made within 6 to 12 months, 12 months being the absolute maximum the PSC can take to respond. So what are some of the public interest standards that they'll be looking at? The project has to be superior to any alternatives that are being offered, promote system reliability, comply with all state and federal safety standards, and be consistent with the Energy Priorities Law, which does say pick renewable energy if there were 2 different projects being proposed in the same location. It cannot unreasonably interfere with orderly land use and development. So that's back to the comprehensive plan. And if you have some certain kinds of maps, those may be considered by the developer and by the PSC when they are looking at project siting. Cannot cause individual hardship. So if there's a homeowner that wants to ask for a specific array to be moved, would be one example. That could be considered by the PSC, and cannot have an undue adverse impact on the environment. This is PSC language, and I think we can all agree it's not exactly clear what any of these stipulations mean, but this is what is currently considered for public interest. And this is a flow chart on the permitting process for any large electrical generating facility. But don't be afraid, Bo. On the next slide, I have something that's broken down and simplified for you. But just to point out, it's a complicated process. The DNR is also involved. We usually just talk about the PSC, but also the DNR. And there's a lot of places for public engagement, which are where these orange arrows are. And I've broken that down for you on the next slide. So first of all, there's a public meeting. So some of you may have attended public meetings, and that's before there's even an application. That's where the developer would be holding an open house, and that is optional. The CPCN application is the actual beginning of the project. The developer applies, and the PSC first has to confirm the application is complete. There's a lot of requirements. So once they confirm that it is complete, they open a case. And so there will be a docket you can follow on the PSC website. You can subscribe. I don't know if any of you here get the easy filing emails from the PSC and enjoy following other projects around the state, but you can. And they're also going to mail a letter notifying the public. That includes local government, any neighbors of the project that are exactly adjacent. And then we're in that 6 to 12 month period for review. There will either be an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, and that is based on some decisions that are made by the PSC about the complicated nature of what the environmental impacts might be. So there will be a 10-day comment period, and that is the first time that the public can make a comment, and the PSC gives guidance on what is an effective public comment. And if you're considering participating, I think it's very clear and trying to help you be the most effective with your engagement. So that this is prepared by the staff, either the environmental assessment or the impact statement. And once it's published, there's going to be another comment period on the draft. And so that depends on the length of the review. The EA is 15 days, the EIS is 45 days. But either way, you're going to have another opportunity to participate and comment. And then there will be hearings after that. There's a technical hearing where you need to be an intervener to participate. There's also a public hearing, and anyone from the general public can come and speak on those. You can comment online, via email, or in person. And then finally, the commission will make their decision. That's a 3-person commission that also is supported by the staff. So they're going to either approve, modify, or deny the project. To date, the PSC has never denied a large-scale renewable energy project because the grid needs to continuously be getting new energy generating facilities online. So after they've made the decision, there's a written order to the applicant that explains the decision, and you can look at previous orders and you can see individual hardship made the move in array, or there's other examples of modification that you can find in the history of the PSC. And then once it's been approved, they need to do project construction, like Tara mentioned. There can be noise, there can be issues with dirt and other impacts to neighbors and local wildlife. So the Joint Development Agreement is a great place to negotiate ground cover, noise issues, and any other best management practices for the construction phase. And the DNR also has a best management practices for large-scale solar development guidance document that we would encourage all developers to use and all communities to encourage them to follow. So there's many ways you can get involved in the process. I assume that's why you're all here tonight. You can read the notification letter. You can review the construction application, which is not short and gets into all sorts of things like how is decommissioning going to look? What is their plan for the environment and soil management? You can attend these public information meetings that are being hosted by the utility, also the scoping meetings. You can be on the PSA mailing list, or you can follow the case online. You can submit comments at multiple points in time during the review process, and you can testify at the public hearing. Those are what you can do as a member of the public, and also then you could become an intervener. The intervener role also gets to participate in the technical hearing, but there is a significant amount of time and cost depending on how you want to pursue that. Usually you do get lawyers involved, but you can go to the PSC website and read all about it directly from them if you haven't already enjoyed this page of the PSC website, which I've spent a lot of time on. So things that they recommend you do when you testify, if you want to be considered: identify who you are, identify how you relate to the project, be specific about the concern that you have, and reference where the information comes from if you're using any specific knowledge. And they do love it if you can propose an alternative, ideally not just don't put it here, but some of the examples where we've seen individual hardship was successful is, I don't want to look at this. It's in front of my house. I would like it if it got moved here. They gave some specific recommendations, and the developer has to get about 120% of the leases that they need. So they have the opportunity to move certain parts of the project to different locations. So that is one feasible option. So there's the scoping period, like we talked about, that's 10 days before the PSC decides whether they'll do an assessment or an impact statement. And you can write and say, I think it should be an environmental impact statement. That's the heavier version because of this waterway issue, this soil issue, this wildlife issue, whatever your reasoning is. You can submit those online or by mail. And then there's another assessment period after the project, after the environmental assessment has been published. And it would be 45 days for an environmental impact statement. So either way, you'll get that second engagement opportunity. Then you can attend the public hearing. Many of you may already be planning to do that. And all of this will become part of the record, and staff review all of the comments, and then they make a staff recommendation to the Public Service Commission. And that is the end of my slides. And then there will be a final decision. So open to questions if anyone has them. And I think you're just going to keep going, right, Maddie? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, so we'll now be moving to Tim Stieber, who is the Land and Water Conservation Administrator in St. Croix, to discuss soil and water background and impacts in St. Croix County.
Got slides and everything? Can
We
you all
can't.
see that? Nothing yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Here we go. How's that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the county's work on groundwater that we've been working on. And always seems to come up as a controversy, and people want to get into the water aspects. There's a lot of private wells in St. Croix County. We've kind of embraced being a bedroom community. About 40, little less than 50% of the people in the county live on rural well and septic outside the municipal areas being the villages and the towns and cities. And what that does is it places a lot of need to protect that water because there's such a large demand for clean water by those folks that live out in the country. And the water that we consume in those wells is largely falls on our county. It's not from some secret source underground or anything. It's basically rainwater that falls and percolates through the ground. This is kind of a cross section of our geology, and almost nearly all the private wells get their water from this shallow aquifer. Prairie du Chien is the largest one that we have. And municipalities like Hudson, New Richmond, drill through that down into sandstone and other formations and get cleaner water. This is really important because a lot of this Prairie du Chien aquifer that underlies most of our county is what's called karst, which is fractured bedrock. And so that's known as moving constituents very rapidly versus just a regular sand and gravel aquifer. Things move a lot slower. The county went through a lot of work over the years in 2008 and even in the 1980s, I believe, to study the groundwater in the county to determine how adequate groundwater was in the county. And that's where they determined where the water was coming from and basic chemistry, depth, construction of that, and those kinds of things. So we have a general knowledge of groundwater in the county. The county then, after that work was done, began to cost share landowners to take water samples to educate themselves on things that might be harming them or might be harmful. Bacteria was quite a problem with a lot of the shallow old wells. Nitrate began to become a problem. There began to be some hot spots that were identified during that time. And then about 2017, there was a large manure spill in Emerald Township, and then from the citizen outlash from that, there was a committee formed, a group, I should say, and they developed quite a detailed plan that they wanted followed, that we have been following. The biggest thing that they wanted us to do was to determine the severity, extent, trends, and sources of nitrate within the county. And they also wanted us to do other things, educate and inform landowners, work with farm operators to reduce the problem, and then also explore regulatory options. And I was hired in 2019 and given that task. The first thing we worked on was the extent. And if you look at the number of wells that we have, and then this is the most recent data that we've got from 2025, and you look at the percentage of wells that fall into various nitrate concentrations, less than 1 part per million is very clean water, pure water. About 16% of the people in the county have access to that kind of water. That's what's coming out of their tap. And about the same number of people, 15%, have water that's exceeding the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million. And then, of course, more concerning to me is the large number of people that kind of follow up that are approaching 10. So we really do have quite a widespread exposure of the population in our rural areas to nitrogen. And so we've begun to study that more. We started a trend series of wells that we were going to study for trend, but we knew it was going to take a long time. So the very first thing we did was to study the TNC wells, which are scattered throughout the county and have to be analyzed every year by the health department. From that data, we found approximately 30% of the wells in that 165 well network that the county samples every year were actually increasing statistically. 12% were decreasing statistically, and other percentages actually had no trend because it was so variable year to year. But what we saw from that initial work was that about a third of the wells are increasing in nitrate, and that has been proven out a couple of different times now. So we do have a pretty significant extent and a trend that's increasing. Then began the fun work, which was, where is this nitrate coming from? And if you ask, the farm community, they'll like to blame septic systems, and the guy on the golf course would blame the manure because he can smell the manure. And basically a finger pointing process ensues very quickly. The four main agencies that work on these issues to describe our natural resources in the state of Wisconsin have had the opinion for quite a number of years that 90% of that nitrate in groundwater is coming from agriculture on average, 9% from on-site septic systems, waste storage, and then 1% from lawns. Work that I did in the Kinnickinnic headwaters area came up with a similar breakdown, but this is probably our worst area of nitrates that we have. Other areas of the county probably have a lower percentage from agriculture, but this is our breakdown that we actually constructed from our own data in the county. So you look at the land use across the county, and there's a number of factors that we use to try to determine how vulnerable is that. We've got location, the land use, well depth, geology, well construction, and other factors that have to be looked at. And that's why it's kind of eluded us for all this time to actually pass any meaningful ordinances or rules, is because it's so variable throughout the county. Basically, we began to study various aspects like contribution from septics. And in our network that we have, we were able to show that the greater the amount of, I should say, the higher density of septic, meaning like 2 acres per septic, which is at standard lot size, had some of the lowest nitrates that we have, versus when you get out into very rural areas with 20 to 40 acres per home, they actually had the highest. And so really what that is because agriculture is kind of the driver of the nitrates, not the septic. And so you get more agriculture in those areas. There's a drop off when you get to greater than 40 because those areas are generally adjacent to large natural areas that don't have any homes in them at all. A lot of times in our work, we get people that live real close to each other and they ask us, why is my well high and why is my neighbor's low? And we get this happen quite a bit, and they usually come in together, so it's kind of uncomfortable. But we've studied a number of these, and we're able to explain why that is, and it's kind of educational. For example, we have well A at 71-foot depth, which is kind of shallow, and well B at 121 foot, and they have a little bit different geology underneath them, and we can use what we've learned from our sampling to figure out why each of them has the nitrates that they have. If we look at upper geology is the material that's below the soil, but down to where you have the well cased. And what we found is that sand and gravel mixes over limestone gives us the highest average nitrate in our county. Sand and gravel over prairie du chien is where our highest nitrates are. And I can explain that with some diagrams in a bit. If you look at the lower geology, so if you drill down into the actual limestone still gives us our highest nitrates because it's the most fractured. It's the most karst-like feature that we have in our county. And so the surface flows move very quickly through that upper part of that limestone and gives us higher nitrate readings. And so when we look at a well, we look at the well log, we can sometimes determine vulnerability. It's kind of explained with this diagram. If I just put a well casing down into that sand and gravel part of it without going to ground to the actual bedrock, you're going to probably have bad water or high nitrates, probably have bacteria too. If you go down to the karst feature with the limestone, but you don't go into it at all, that's almost the same because that upper part of the karst is generally the most fractured. But if you drill through and get deeper in, go another 10 or 20 feet, or even go all the way through and case it all the way down, the water will be very clean. That's why you can have a person across the street from you with very clean water because they have a well driller that drilled their well deeper. So when you're looking at it, you can't just use maps to determine where problems are because somebody across the street will have a high well and your well is low. The last thing that we look at is surface use. So around well A, we've got some row crops, but we have the direction of flow. We have a lot of natural area, and only part of the area around that well is row crop versus well B. It's largely row crop cultivated land. There's a little bit of forest up that way. But each of those land uses that we have in the maps that I've been showing you have losses associated with them. So if you have continuous corn, it's the highest loss versus corn in rotation and on down the list. And so you can look at what's around a well in a half mile, a mile around you and determine how risk you have as far as losses. Corn frequency is important because corn is our highest contributor. This is just basically looking at the frequency of corn rotation around wells that we have in our long-term monitoring, and the wells that have the highest frequency of corn in the rotation have the highest nitrates. So corn frequency has turned out to be a valuable predictor, and that's what turned out in this example case here, where well B turned out to have a lot of corn around it for a long time, whereas well A has a rotation of corn and soybeans, and well A turns out to be lower, even though it's shallower in depth, and they put the well into sand and gravel, which should be higher. Well B is surrounded by row crops, and it's into the limestone upper portion, and it has a high corn frequency. Next thing we've been doing is educating and informing landowners, and we've been doing this through clinics, and we've done about 30 clinics since it started in 2019. And we do that. We discuss the sample results with landowners on site. And then when people have a high well, they always ask what they can do about it. Replacement is not an option. It's extremely expensive. It would cost $21 million to replace the wells that are over 10 parts per million in St. Croix County alone. And we could promote treatment, but that's expensive as well. That would be 3 to 4 million just for a single tap for all of these wells that are above 10. Or a whole home system would cost 14 million for that number of wells that are over 10. So treatment is part of the answer, but treatment, it's always going to be expensive. The other thing to do is to try to work on fixing the problem. And the way to fix the problem for nitrates in the county is to first understand that it relates to load, and you have to take that approach or you will not be able to solve the problem. If you look at background is receiving about 1.5 pounds, 1.6 pounds a year from the ground above it. Light impacts, a little bit more. To where down where you get to 10 parts per million, they're only getting about 18 pounds a year. And then, of course, you have wells like the Emerald Tunnel that was up in the 40 range. That's receiving an incredible load of nitrate from the surrounding landscape. And so there really are differences out there with regard to what's going on in the landscape, and that relates to the groundwater in that area. We were able to calculate in some study areas the load that related to the actual groundwater that we had based on about 619 samples that we had collected. And we were able to build a model that we utilize to evaluate BMPs. And this work is ongoing. We can compare things like crop rotation. For example, continuous corn, if it's on 50% of the landscape, all the wells will be well over 10. If you go into a corn and soybean rotation and you have half of the landscape under that regime, you're only at about 6.3. The old-fashioned great rotation of corn, beans, and then alfalfa, that gives us something down that you could almost live with. But those rotations are not near as common anymore as they once were on the landscape. Cover crops have been popular, and they can be part of the solution. So if you put just a corn and soybean rotation on the landscape, like we said, 6.4 parts per million, if you have it on half the landscape. If you put cover crops just on the soybean, you're making some inroads. If you do cover crops on all the row crops that you grow, you're down into a much more manageable situation. Reducing manure application can be part of the solution. The average application that we have in St. Croix County is 19,300 gallons an acre of average dairy slurry. That's a high value. If you look for recommendations from the university locally in Minnesota, it's about 10,000. So it's kind of a high application. And that's reflected in some of the buildup of soil phosphorus that we're seeing. And lowering the application rate would utilize more of that nutrient, less would be lost. It would save some nitrogen. The last one is important, and that's improving nitrogen efficiency, applying nitrogen at the best time, doing a better budget on the field, taking all the forms into account, doing better testing prior to side dressing. All of these BMPs are all known and don't need to be researched that much. They've all been researched practically to death. Adoption of these strategies would reduce leaching 10 to 15 pounds an acre. That's a significant reduction. In the modeling that we did, we were able to, we predict with a 50% adoption of those BMPs, we could easily stop the increase that we've been seeing and reduce nitrates to quite a much more acceptable level than where they're at right now. Baseline is yellow. And some of those areas have over 30% of the wells over 10. And then the impact of the solar development, actually, if you use that same thought process of thinking about your impacts on load, right now we have about 1,300 acres of corn that's at 32 pounds an acre, average soybeans at about 9 pounds an acre, and other crops at 1 to 2 pounds. So basically, if we converted it to native vegetation, there would only be 1 to 1.5 pounds leached after that was established. So what that would do is right now it's at about 9.3 parts per million in that Kinney headwaters. It would probably drop that to about 8.4. It would not be able to drag that many more wells below the 10 parts per million because the average is quite close to 10 already. And so other work would have to be done to make further reductions. I believe there'd be impacts on surface water, but I think that'd be hard to predict. I think a lot of the details have to be worked out in that JDA myself. Right now, a lot of the farms in the area that are proposed to go into the solar have really low erosion rates, and they tend to have fairly good farming practices. But if we try to establish that big of a native planting, I think that would cause it's just challenging to do that. I have established quite a number of 100-acre plantings of native vegetation, and it's challenging. Thousands of acres is a real big job. So there definitely have to be some oversight of that. And then I will save that questions until the end.
Thank you, Tim. And we do have a couple extra minutes if anyone had anything. Otherwise, we will loop back and ask questions for the end. So we now have Kristen May, who is a community coordinator with the Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy. And she will share about the local economic impacts of the project. So Chris, if you wanted me to share those slides, I can do that.
That would be great, Maddie. Thank you.
Just folks, let me know if there's issues again. And
I can start while you're getting that ready, Maddie. My name is Kristen May, and I live here in Wisconsin. I am from Southwest Wisconsin. My husband and I farm here, and I also am the chamber, work in the chamber space. I'm our community relations coordinator, and I have a really great opportunity each day. I help lead our Energizing Economies campaign, where Energizing Economies is a campaign where we help local businesses, business leaders, economic development directors, chamber directors, anybody that has a case in the decision making for utility scale projects in the state. We help provide them with factual information and help them navigate these processes. You can do the next slide, Maddie. Maybe.
did that next slide move for folks? No.
It did.
It did or did not?
No, it did not.
Okay.
No.
Oh, now we have it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. You can do the next one. I kind of did this one already. Okay, so Energizing Economies, we support, like I said, chambers of commerce, economic development. We work with local business owners. A lot of my time is spent speaking to local business owners about projects as they come into the area or proposed, and also working with township and local government to help them as well navigate these projects as they come in and discuss the economic benefits to these. Next. So the business case for a utility scale solar or wind project, in this case was St. Croix Solar, we look at the economic growth with investment and revenues. We work with workforce development and the demand for local services. When these projects come to town, they're bringing, anywhere between 150 and 300 workers with them that all need services locally. And what that looks like is people staying in the hotels, using our restaurants, any local services that we use. They're here, for a period of time, months, sometimes up to 2.5 years. They're looking for the things that we experience here and enjoy at home. So I work hard to help the businesses capture that revenue as it's here, and local lodging and camping facilities as well navigate that. Next. One of the things that I've been working on with projects here across the state is turning construction into customers. And this is an opportunity that really has made huge impacts on our local businesses, as in our farming community, where our farmers are looking for different ways to subsidize their income. And that's why they are at times, signing up for solar or wind projects. Our local businesses are in the exact same boat where they are looking for things that help them generate revenue. So I work with groups of businesses and do a lot of leadway to them to let them know when the projects are coming and how they can get involved and make this the construction home for them as they are here working. It looks like economic wins for these businesses, bringing opportunities to them that they wouldn't necessarily have if there wasn't a construction project going on. And the part that I love is that I get to help these businesses thrive versus survive. And when you're talking to the business community about these potential projects coming in, it's really no different on my end than they're thinking they're getting excited about camping season starting and hosting those people, or the snowmobile trails. They're open for business and they're looking for opportunities. So it's definitely something that provides our hardworking businesses much needed opportunities to help them with their income. Next. The bottom line is, with economic impacts, the utility scale clean energy development is good for our Wisconsin communities, and it's good for business. We're open for business, and it's good for us. Next. If you have any questions about this, or you'd like to dig deeper into the work that we do on our Energizing Economies campaign, this slide has my information on it, and I'd be happy to meet with you or your organizations and just serve as a resource for those groups. Next. That might be it.
And yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We do have a bit of extra
of course.
time too. So if folks have specific questions to your presentation and to local businesses to St. Croix, we can open up to that.
Yeah, be happy to answer any questions.
Looks like Tara has her hand raised there.
Yeah, Kristen, have you heard of any businesses who have experienced concerns with some of like the noise pollution kind of stuff that can happen during construction or stuff like that? Because there are some bars that I've seen that are right on the verge of some of these projects. Or do you have any stories of businesses who have navigated, or any specific stories, positive or negative?
Yeah, I do have a lot of very positive stories. People who went through projects and had 2-year booms in their business where they were able to replace the roof on their establishment, buy a new refrigeration system, things that really put them on the edge of being able to do these things that they needed. As far as negatives for any businesses, the only thing I've ever heard is that it caused them like slower impacts for their regular customers. Sometimes there's frustrations with them not being able to keep up with the volume or having the staff to, facilitate hosting this many people when they're all looking for places to eat. And then also, like the hotels, like trying to find enough staff to keep everything going. But as far as like negatives, as far as not wanting to have them stay with them or dine with them or anything like that, I have not had those stories, Tara. Is that helpful?
Super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's the stories that have come out from the people who have hosted projects that maybe have now one coming again in their area. I spend a lot of time with people that are really on edge about, is this going to happen? Like, we're really looking forward to it. So I just think it's really important to consider the economic impacts to the businesses and also our landowners as well when we're all, just trying to work really hard to make a go of it.
All right. Well, thank you so much there, Chris.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, since we have a little bit of extra time, Tim, if you're still on, it looks like there is a question in the chat for you about adding confidence limits to the nitrate reduction results. If you want to take a moment to address that.
Hmm. Which confidence nitrate reduction? Oh, okay. So down when I get into these things, probably.
We can't,
Uh,
but probably.
yeah. What, not sure what the question was.
I can read it out here.
Okay.
It's from Thomas in the chat. It says, this is for Tim. Could
Yeah.
you add confidence limits, error bars to the nitrate reduction results comparing present conditions with the modeled conditions after the project completion?
Oof. Definitely cannot do that. Um, what we do know, um, why I believe I have good confidence in the reductions that would result is that when we you can't really see my screen. When we measured we did the mass balance in the Kinney Headwaters area, which is right on the encompasses part of the project area, the proposed project area. We determined the load using 619 samples, and then we use land use and the best research we could find on reductions from the different crops and the BMPs. And there's always a range in there because sometimes it doesn't grow as good. Your cover crops don't grow or as good as they do another year and those kinds of things. However, when we compared the total amount of loss of nitrate to the groundwater from the actual groundwater sample, 619 samples, to the amount that we did with the model, it was within 2%. So we have a high degree of confidence in the load estimates that we're making using land use values. For example, the corn has X amount, soybeans with cover crops. But yeah, there's always going to be variation between sites and that kind of thing. But um, we're very confident that the BMPs that we have identified in that slideshow will and can reduce nitrates on our landscape. So that I don't have a percentage or an error bar from it because it wasn't like replicated research.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Hopefully, Tom, that answers some of your concern there. And we can always loop back at the end if you have further questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll next move to Mike Grolum, and he is going to be speaking on the process of forming community benefit agreements and joint development agreements with his background in rural economic development. So thank you, Mike, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I forgot to include an introduction slide. I work for the Dakota Resource Council. I'm based out of Fargo, North Dakota, and I'm also the director of the Energy Builders program for Bold out of Nebraska. Um, we're Bold is mostly a pipeline fighting organization, but after many years of preventing things from getting built, we wanted to get onto the proactive side of development. And we have a model where we come into communities, try to make these projects more beneficial for the communities so that they're more likely to be approved by those communities, which gets more power on the grid and does so at a reduced rate because projects are more likely to succeed. So, community benefit agreement and joint development agreement are basically the same concept. They're just two different words that different groups use for the same thing. And it includes a whole variety of policies. This can be anything from a annual contribution to a community fund, which is dispersed how the community would like. You can endow an operation. You can do direct payments to government, which several of the largest community benefit agreements have been. Particularly in New England, a number of communities have been able to get in the area of $500,000 a year for their community projects of similar size to the St. Croix project here. And then it's all kinds of in-kind transfers too. One of the biggest CBAs ever signed was a $5,000 land easement, which was to go to a state park in, I believe, Maine. And the total value of that land project was $50 million. So these can be very large and generous projects for the community. And then one of the key things is to have an actual organization that can administer the CBA. In the cases that I have done, this has been a local economic development authority. We have a CBA that's coming online probably next year in the Fargo area. We have an entire organization that runs endowments like that in our community. So there's always going to be something like this, but you generally want an organization that's publicly accountable, but also with a slight degree of independence so that the elected officials can't be bullied into, say, abandoning the JDA or the CBA, because that is a potential issue. And these techniques, it's very important to keep in mind, are not limited to energy projects. If you have a big factory or especially a data center coming into your community, this should be at the top of the list of your demands for that project is to, ask for something, anything. So why do we want to do a community benefit agreement? The theory behind this is that when you're coming into a new community, you want to obtain something called a social license to operate. It's basically just the community's consent for you to be participating in their community. And this is very important for developers because roughly 50% of projects don't even get built. They're just dead in the water. The developers spend millions of dollars getting to this point. And anything that they can do to make these projects more likely to succeed and get built improves their finances. So, and the other thing reason that these are important is that compared to other technologies like the coal facility that this is replacing, it comes with much fewer jobs. The operating expense, the long-term cost of a solar or wind facility is almost entirely in the construction phase, and that lasts 2 years. From then on, the actual maintenance costs and operating costs and the labor costs are pretty trivial compared to the overall expenses. So this, is a way to kind of counteract that and bring more money back to the community. So when you're making demands, the most important thing is to scale it to a realistic size for the project. So we do three levels of economic estimates. Like if you ask, I can just give you a good number. And then I also have just a base model, and then we have a full financial model of how these things work too. In the future, this is going to be something that we ask for a voluntary contribution for, but luckily you guys got on board early enough, so you'll be getting yours for free. What we recommend is that once you have a good idea of what the actual project's revenue looks like, is to ask for roughly 1 to 5% of that, depending on the project. If it's a data center aligned project, we would recommend asking for more. If it's a cooperatively owned project, we would recommend asking for less because that project's going to just come out of your pockets anyway. Um, and then you want to target your demands. And the idea of this is that you're trying to improve this for the community at large. You really want your community benefit agreement, your development authority or development agreement to benefit as many people in the community as possible. So like I said before, this can go into an endowment. You can have an annual fund where members of the community vote on where you're going to attribute the money that year to. You can put it into major infrastructure projects, like say the roof on a school, which is what we're looking at locally for a project.
Yeah.
And then you can do multiple of these things at once. So really, you want to rain as much cash to as many people as possible. So going back to the annual fund, this is really common with some of the larger CBAs that have been signed. Basically, you just get an annual fee. You'll have an organization that then votes on how that's distributed to applicants. It is really good for getting money to the places where it needs to go when it needs to go, but the administrative costs are a little bit higher. And you just have the potential of losing track of it over time because these projects, especially a solar project, could last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. The components that we're putting into these have an indefinite lifespan at this point. So we actually don't know how long these projects are going to last. Going back to the endowment idea, this is a really good, thing, especially in a really rural community. Where one of these projects comes around once in a lifetime. This is their one chance to build up that long-term wealth that can maintain them for, generations into the future. You can also do major infrastructure projects. We've talked about the schools and the parks. And there are also a huge array of project accommodations that you can ask for in your community benefit agreement. These can include setbacks from housing, setbacks from major roads, setbacks from parks, cemeteries. You can have labor requirements. You can require union labor. Anything you can ask for can fit into this. And the last one is what has been common with some of the projects, particularly in New England, is just to do direct revenue apportionment to the community. So we have some example community benefit agreements. In New Rockford, North Dakota, this is a county with 2,000 people. New Rockford has 1,200 people. Their entire county budget is $10 million for schools, township roads, everything. Their CBA is going to get them an extra $400,000 a year over the life of the project, on top of the just under $1.5 million of tax revenue. So the public money in this county is going to go up by 20% overnight once this project is built. So on top of the annual payments, they're also getting an upfront payment, I believe, of $150,000 to each of the communities. There are four. A $600,000 economic development grant, a $150,000 grant to rebuild the theater whose roof caved in 2 years ago. And it's going to be a completely revolutionary result for this community once this is up and running. On the other side of the scale, we have a couple projects from Soul Systems. These are all from Illinois. And what this organization has been doing is going to local schools, the local high school specifically, and they're building greenhouse-sized or classroom-sized greenhouses, and they're integrating aquaponics into them. So it's a full, educational facility for the entire aspect of modern, integrated agriculture. And then for the outside project, they have a separate solar array for the school with an agrivoltaic setup so they can, do the entire agrivoltaics education as well. And then they get food and electricity off this project. So that entire project brings in about $500,000 to $1 million to one of these schools in terms of an educational facility. And, like I said, these don't have to be just clean energy projects. Castleton, North Dakota is a city of about 2,000 people, about 50 miles west of Fargo. And it's a very large and loud facility. So what the city of Castleton did is they negotiated a wide variety of operational restrictions. They had to put in shelter belts and tree lines and things like that. And they're also paying $100,000 a year to the city, um, which is, again, a big deal for a smaller town. And the original CBA that this entire project was modeled off was a tall grass pipeline going through Nebraska. And that one we were able to get $2 million per year going into the communities alongside that footprint. So yeah, I don't need to explain to anyone how big of a deal $2 million a year is for a rural area. So, and finally, we have my favorite CBA special case, which is agrivoltaics. So the prime agricultural land problem is a big complaint with solar projects all around the country. In North Dakota, we have had about 50 wind projects and about 6 or 7 solar projects make it to our Public Service Commission. We've had one wind project fail and 5 of 7 solar projects fail. And they have all failed because of basically this prime agricultural land problem. And that is something that the agrivoltaics idea fixes because we're not taking this land out of rotation. We're just putting a different crop on it. So this can be, sheep, goats, llamas. You can do bees. You can do a variety of berry crops. In the Red River Valley where I live, it's one of the flattest places on earth. So you can entirely hide a 3,500-acre solar array with a row of trees, and no one will even know it's there for 50 years. So there's a whole variety of things that you can work in with the agrivoltaics thing into a CBA. You can make your agrivoltaics operation community owned, so a portion of the revenue from your agrivoltaics operation goes to the community. It's really a very interesting open-ended idea for how to make these both more beneficial for the landowners, the community who owns it, and just, the environment generally. So I believe our next speakers will be talking about agrivoltaics. So any questions?
I do see a couple questions here in the chat. One of which addresses the utility aid piece that Tara spoke on, which Mike, you're welcome to answer this as well. Tom was asking if the money that's given to the town and community by the utility, if that's just money that has to be paid as an additional tax by higher rates by taxpayers.
So it kind of depends on how the facility itself is owned. If it's an investor-owned facility, which is probably about 50% of the projects that get built right now, that is mostly coming out of the equity investor. So in a normal development, once it's built, any extra surplus revenue or benefits that come out of that would just accrue to the owner. But in this case, since we're negotiating to get some of that back from the owner for ourselves. And that's part of why I recommended going for a smaller CBA in the case of a cooperatively owned facility, especially because at the end of the day, you are just taking that money and paying it back to yourselves, even if the actual specific people might be slightly different. But at the same time, it's perfectly reasonable for us to, give a little bit extra for the communities that are doing the burden of, or taking on the burden of hosting these. So,
And then I see,
from Carrie.
yes, okay, great. You can read that.
Well, the risks of walking away from the GDA is that you're going to have less influence from on the project, how it's built, how it turns out, how much the workers are paid, things like that. And it basically just takes away all the protections that you have built into it. Um, with a solar array, it's basically a passive piece of equipment, so there's not really a whole lot of long-term operation stuff that can be done to it outside of just the land operation. So, um, long-term risks, basically about the same. So, I would recommend doing the JDA personally, but if your state regulations are strong enough, you can get away without it.
And I'm just going to read out Tara's summary for Mike's explanation because I think it is helpful because I have heard a lot of confusion just on the ground about how that utility aid is distributed. She said all of the ratepayers of Excel would be paying for the benefit of the residents affected by the CBA. Ideally, a CBA should make sure to invest the dollars in ways that would provide greater benefit back to the community hosting.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because XL is an investor-owned utility. So it is going to, some of it will probably be passed on to consumers, but part of it's also going to come out of the corporate profits as well. So we're just taking a little bit of corporate profits from them too.
And Carrie also brought up a concern that I've also heard from folks in St. Croix that who argue against a JDA, and they say that it would be required by the PSC anyways, anything that would be negotiated in the JDA.
That could be in your state. That is not the case in North Dakota, so I'll leave that to the experts on Wisconsin law.
I hesitate to chime in as an expert on Wisconsin law, but so there is the utility aid payment, which is required by the law, which is $5,000 per megawatt, which I referenced at the 1.4 million. I am as everybody who's talked to me about this knows, I think that the community should always push for the best deal that they can possibly get. So if your JDA is only giving you what's allowed in the law, you are not pushing hard enough in your JDA or your community benefits agreement. You should be pushing for better benefits. You should, like, as the King plant got a park out of it, as other communities are doing this, you should create the expectation that you are pushing for more. If you think that it's only covering what's already legally allowed, it's not worthy of your negotiation time.
Yeah, 100% endorse every word there.
Okay, awesome. Unless there's any further questions on JDAs, we'll move forward. Thank you, Mike. It was very helpful. And we now have Mary Beth Barker to speak on her work with pollinator habitats, grazing, and overall land maintenance beneath solar projects for One Energy. But this is really to help show what is possible for solar projects in St. Croix County. And I'll let you take it away, Mary Beth.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike, for setting me up for agrivoltaics. That was perfect. So my name is Mary Beth Barker. I'm a land stewardship associate with One Energy Renewables, and I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. Super excited to talk to you about agrivoltaics or dual use solar today, and kind of all the ways that we as solar developers are implementing and supporting dual use. Let's see. Oops. There we go. So One Energy Renewables, we're based in Madison, but we do have offices all over the country. So we have an office in Seattle, one in Portland, and one in Boulder as well. And most of our projects, however, are based concentrated in Wisconsin and surrounding states. So there you can see kind of where most of our projects are concentrated right now. And this includes some projects that are under construction as well. So we develop distributed generation, large-scale utility, and community solar projects. And we're a public benefit corporation. And usually our projects are about 10 to 40 acres, and they're ground-mounted tilt projects. So we are mostly in the Midwest. So what is dual use solar? So dual use solar refers to combining solar energy production with agriculture or conservation land use. So you've probably heard the term agrivoltaics. We like to use dual use solar because it kind of encompasses the types of native prairie pollinator habitat that you can establish underneath solar panels in addition to that agriculture. So that includes sheep grazing, specialty crops, and some places are even practicing doing cattle, rabbits, ducks, chickens, pigs. There's like all sorts of things you can do under solar panels, and a lot of it's experimental right now, but a lot of it is like pretty robust. So what does dual use look like at One Energy Renewables? This is just a quick snapshot of what we have going right now. So we have about 75% of our sites are in pollinator habitat. So that includes a native mix of wildflowers that is native to Wisconsin, usually resembling like a prairie type mix. Except one caveat is that we need to plant things that are under 3 feet, because if we have things that are growing too tall into the panels, it will shade out the panels. So we have to make kind of a customized solar mix that's a little bit different from your tall grass prairie in Wisconsin, mostly because we can't include things like compass plant and prairie dock that grow to like 8 to 12 feet tall. But otherwise, we include all of the like low growing common native prairie plants in our pollinator habitat. So then the other 25% of our sites are in sheep grazing. And so usually that is up to the grazer to determine the seed mix, but we will typically just do your average grazing mix that's like going to get nutrients to your sheep and keep erosion down. So we kind of combine all those things into one. That middle picture is just where all our sheep grazing sites are right now, and those are some little sheep that are under our panels. So a cool thing that NREL does, the National Renewable Energy Lab, is they have this dual use project map that just shows all of the current agrivoltaics projects that are happening across the country. So the orange icons show pollinator habitat, which is the most common. And those are really highly concentrated, as you can see, in the Midwest. And then the blue circles are for grazing, which is mainly sheep grazing right now. And then green circles show sites that are crop production. So that number is increasing pretty quickly. People are experimenting with crop production under panels more and more. People are also experimenting with cattle grazing under panels a lot more as well. One I want to point out is Jack's Solar Garden. That's that main green one you can see like on top in the Colorado section. And that's a really cool place to check out if you haven't heard of it. Looking it up, I can also post a link to it in the chat later. They are a really good example of some like really robust agrivoltaics going on, doing specialty crops under some panels. And he's a really cool guy. He does all this outreach. And so, yeah, just something to look into. So I'm going to talk a little bit about solar grazing. Solar grazing is a great way to continue to use land for agriculture after you build a solar site. So since we're usually building projects on former corn and soy fields, it's important that solar isn't taking away that farmland. So sheep grazing is a really good option for that. It doesn't require major modifications to our projects. We can usually build a project and then just throw some sheep in there. And there's some minor modifications you have to make, but it's not like a major design effort. So the panels are already high enough above the ground for sheep to graze beneath them. And then, the sheep basically become our lawnmowers, and we can pay farmers to manage vegetation through grazing. So that helps diversify their income, and they can expand their flocks. They're getting basically land to put sheep on. So I think a lot of people imagine solar being really industrial, not much going on under the panels, but seeing sheep grazing between solar panels and like hanging out in the shade like they are right there, I think it's really neat to see. And it's like there is all this life that can happen underneath panels, and we all love shade, we love shelter, and sheep definitely use it as shelter. Kind of a fun new word that people have been throwing around is ecovoltaics. So that describes any solar projects that are coupled with vegetation that provides ecosystem services. For us, that's those native prairies I was talking about. So it supports native bees, improves water quality, storing carbon in the soil. My background is actually in conservation biology, and I was previously working for a prairie restoration contractor. So when I started at One Energy, it was very exciting to see how many sites we could still convert to prairie. So even though I left doing prairie restoration, I still get to like do prairie restoration just under panels. And it's really neat. So that's a picture of our Stockton solar site. That is when we had this big bloom of black-eyed Susan, and that was that first slide too. Just all this yellow and then all these nice little natives kind of interspersed, and that was really cool to see. So what do we plant on our pollinator habitat sites? So our native seed mix includes all of these wildflowers on this slide. So there's typically about 30 species. It'll depend on what nurseries are supplying what, but this is like the main mix that we use. And when we establish a native prairie habitat, we work with ecological restoration companies to design the seed mixes and then establish the prairies. So it's been fun to visit the projects every year and kind of see them grow more diverse over time. It is kind of a time-consuming process, especially when fields were in corn previously. That can be kind of hard in the first couple of years for plants to establish, but yeah, it's cool to see over time how native plants are really resilient with their correct management practices, and hiring those ecological restoration companies really helps to keep those well managed and looking nice. And we get an increased prairie in Wisconsin, which is awesome. So these are just a couple studies that have been done about how establishing pollinator habitat has increased biodiversity on sites. So this one shows how many insects and pollinators were increased over the span of a project life. And it looks like, okay, it says that the bees increased 20-fold. And I'm not sure exactly what 20-fold means. My coworker made this slide, but I think that's very cool. And one of my favorite studies that has been done on these sites is by the Argonne Lab. So they did a study on bird habitat at solar facilities, and their focus was on determining whether species richness in these ecovoltaic sites differed from control areas, which were essentially what you can see in that circle, what the farm field outside of the project. And they found not only that the ecovoltaic sites supported more grassland bird species each week, but the communities were more stable than those in the agrivoltaics fields. So they stayed basically. And species richness was twice as high at the solar sites. So that's just kind of another like cool research to reference, and there's more research coming out all the time. It's definitely like in its infancy, this type of research, and it's cool to see. So one of our bigger projects that we're working on is Good Oak Solar. So most of our projects are in that 10 to 40 acre realm. So Good Oak is one of our biggest projects. That one's about 100 megawatts. I'm not sure how many acres, but it's 100 megawatts, so a little bigger. Still a bit smaller than that 10 Mile Creek project. So most of our sites are like significantly smaller than that project, but this one I would say is like the most comparable. So we're working with the Aldo Leopold Foundation on a study of population of birds, monarchs, butterflies, and how that differs between agricultural land. So they're going to be able to do a study for us on that bigger site and kind of see like what biodiversity we can find. So let's see, the picture on the right is all the areas that they're going to collect data on birds. They did some pre-construction surveys, and that's that picture there that is showing those bird species. That's what was found on site. So let's see. So we also partner with Arts Bees. They have hives at our Webster Creek project in New Lisbon. And we buy a bunch of their honey usually to share at community engagement events. It's really good. The site has lots of clover, and the honeybees really like it there. So this is like one of my favorite like products to come out of agrivoltaics is honey. Like that's the best thing ever. So our Rush Village project is actually right next to Featherstone Farm, who we also partner with. They are an organic fruit and vegetable farm. You can see it in the picture. They're just to the left of kind of where those solar panels are. So this past summer, they were willing to help us experiment with growing some crops under panels. So they started testing growing some herbs between the rows. And they're kind of using it as an experiment to see how well they do with the intermittent sunlight and then how well they do directly under the panels. So I think they're going to compare that, see if they do better, and if it can protect them from like drought, heat stress, frost. And so we hope this will be the first of like a lot more collaborations with farmers to grow specialty crops under panels. I think it could be a really unique opportunity. And then our Ledgeview Solar Project in Fond du Lac, this is also named Woolly Watts by Olivia Halber, who's the landowner and the sheep farmer there. So at our solar sites, we pay farmers to graze sheep instead of paying to have the sites mowed. So the sheep really like grazing in the shade. I feel like I kind of talked about that a little bit, but we're working with another organization who's doing some studies on how rotational grazing in the solar array impacts soil health. So compare that to the corn adjacent. And so that'll be interesting to see like what they find from that. There's also a really neat video that I might also post from UW Stevens Point about Olivia's farm. And I just think it's cool to see all the sheep kind of moving around grazing under the panels. So these sheep actually live on site year round. And that's kind of unique. A lot of places will graze sheep intermittently on different sites and kind of truck them from site to site. But Olivia lives right next door. So she's able to keep the sheep on site. We actually got a grant to be able to add some wire fencing. That makes it easier for her to do rotational grazing. And then that photo on the bottom left is her leading her pasture walks. And that's what she calls her Woolly Watts tours. And it's a really cool outreach tours that she does that are open. I don't know how often she opens them to the public, but she'll do them pretty frequently. So if you're ever curious to look at sheep on a site, she does that quite often. So we've learned a lot from her on kind of best practices for sheep grazing under panels. What am I at on time? Okay, well, I'll skip over this one because you guys are about to hear from Bo, but he also works with us on our Tido Solar grazing sheep. And kind of a work in progress for One Energy, but we're testing out cattle grazing. Hopefully we'll have a pilot project running soon. But that's kind of like in the works for us, very exciting. I think that cattle grazing will be a lot more of like a robust economic opportunity for farmers. So I think that'll be really cool to see the outcome there. And then these are just a couple of our sites. So this is Shamrock Solar. This was seeded in native prairie mix about 4 years ago. And it is just one of those projects that's looking super nice right now. You can see all the wildflowers that are coming up. And it's just like one of those high quality prairies that I love to go visit it. Strobus Solar is the same way. We found some really good species. That's Prairie Blazing Star and some wild columbine. And then Stockton is in its 5th year of prairie establishment. I would say this is like our favorite like pollinator habitat site. It's been doing really well. And it's that one that had that big black-eyed Susan bloom. So that's a great one. And then actually this year, I took that picture on the right. It had a giant golden Alexander bloom. So it just loves to pick one wildflower every year that goes crazy. So that's a great site. And we work with Monarch Joint Venture out there. They do some drone surveys of milkweed. And that's been really neat to see kind of how drone technology and AI technology has been able to kind of do some surveying kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's all I have for you. We're reachable by vegetation, One Energy, renewables, if you're ever interested. And tours, we give a lot of tours. We do community engagement, community outreach. So feel free to reach out to me or my colleague at any time. But thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Beth. And it looks like there's just a couple of questions in here for you. One of them coming from Rebecca, a concern that if hail would damage the solar panels, if you've ever seen that before, and with it contaminating the land, and then which party would be responsible for cleanup and associated costs if you've had to deal with that with any of your projects.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding it, the question was if hail damages the panels, how much does that contaminate the land and how would we clean it up? correct? Okay. Yeah, so I have not seen hail ever damage the panels. I think it is possible. So we have and I don't know, they keep blanking on the word. It's on an axis. So our solar it'll track the sun throughout the day. So it starts facing east and then it faces west eventually in the afternoon. So if there's risk of storms, we have weather stations, like little mini weather stations on each of our sites. If there's a risk of storms, it'll automatically stow. So it'll stow like pretty much vertical. Um, and so you get a lot less of that hail risk because, right now in this picture, it's kind of at an angle. I think it'd be more at risk for hail damage when they're in that vertical angle. It's a little lower risk, but it's actually less common than it seems. They're pretty tough panels. And then if a panel does break, it's actually pretty unlikely that it'd be a high contamination risk. They're very well designed to kind of be this like glass sandwich. And I'm definitely not a like materials engineer, but I've never heard of that being an issue. And like all of our plants live really happily under the panels. I've never seen anything hurt them if there has been cracks in the solar, which is pretty infrequent. So it's never really been a concern. We do have emergency response programs where we train people for fire risk, which is actually a bit higher of just based on either wildfires that are entering the site or similar kind of faults. So we do have emergency response plans that we implement and talk to like local fire departments to kind of know what they would need to do in the very unlikely event that that happens. So yeah.
You wanted to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, going to the durability of the panels. I'm a engineer, so I've gone over this pretty deep. They're generally rated to take baseball-sized hail at 100 miles per hour, which is more than the terminal velocity of that hail size. So really, the only thing you have to worry about is wind-driven, very large hail, and I don't even know how much you get of that in Wisconsin. I know we get it maybe once a decade in North Dakota. It's where you see the panels getting destroyed are in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma. Outside of there, it's a very, very rare occurrence. There is a famous example from Hurricane Marie in 2017. One of the hospitals in San Juan had 600 megawatts of solar panels on its roof. And when that hurricane went through, it wiped out the power grid for most of the island, and a lot of people died in the hospitals at that time. But in that specific hospital, they didn't lose a single solar panel, even though they took a direct hit from a Category 5 hurricane, and everyone in that hospital survived because of the solar panels. So they're very durable. And going to the contamination, modern solar panels are made out of silicon. About 20 years ago, there was a different material they made them out of called cadmium telluride. That is what, if you've ever heard of solar panels leaching anything, that's those type of panels. They are no longer produced. Almost all of them that have ever been built have been torn down, so you don't have to worry about that at all. A solar panel is basically a layer of silicon, which is inert. It's basically sand. And then it has a layer of either titanium or gold oxide on either side to carry away charge. And then it's wrapped in plastics and resins and heavy, like Pyrex type of glass. So it's windshield or stronger. Hockey glass would be a good comparison material wise.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And
Yep,
thank you,
thank
Mary
you.
Beth. We'll loop back to more questions at the end because I want to make sure we have time for Bo's presentation here. Yeah, which Mary Beth introduced well. He has experience as a farmer in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. Sorry about that. Grazing his sheep beneath solar panels in his community. So I'll let him go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Maddie. Can everybody see the presentation? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Bo Stafford. I'm owner and operator of Discovery Grazing in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts on the Ten Creek solar project. Um, Throughout my slides, I'll plan to share about our story, explain why solar grazing works, and explore some of the challenges and maybe some of the opportunities for solar grazing on large project sites. My wife and I started our farm in 2019. We never planned to solar graze when we started. Like many others, we wanted to raise our kids on the farm, but my wife, being a city slicker, she said that we needed to find a place close to town. So when we bought a farm, a 56-acre farm, just 10 minutes from downtown Madison. We started as a certified organic farm. We began selling small square hay, some compost. We always had plans of starting livestock, but it wasn't until I received a notice in the mail informing us that One Energy was constructing the Tyto solar site adjacent to our farm. I went to the meeting skeptical. I think, like a lot of people, I was I support renewable energy, just maybe not my backyard type of thing. But I went to the meeting. I understood kind of what they were hoping to accomplish. The main concern I had was what they were going to plant at the site and how that would impact my certification, my organic certification, and the type of vegetation or the type of hay that I was producing. Um, when I said my piece. There weren't many people there. It was just me and the folks from One Energy. We got to talking, and I told them, yeah, we're first generation farm. We're starting off, and eventually we're gonna start doing some livestock and probably do it next spring.
Engaged in your meeting.
And so they asked if I was interested in maybe raising sheep to graze the site. And I hadn't really thought about sheep. My experience as a kid, I didn't grow up farming, but I did farm work for neighboring farms, and one of which was my neighbor. He used to raise lambs for the county fair. I thought, well, if I got some experience of how to take care of a sheep, why not see if we could take care of a flock? So my wife and I, we talked about the idea of maybe using the sheep on another additional 31 acres of land adjacent to our farm. And we decided to use our compost revenue to buy our first flock of sheep. And that was 15 head back in 2023. And by the end of this month, we're looking at about 502 sheep total. So we have scaled up considerably. We grazed the first 31 acres in 2024, and then we added another two sites at a total of about 107 acres off our farm. And then we'll be adding another 126 this summer. The important part, I think, is that, we went into this with the opportunity of new land. And that was, especially in our area and the Dane County area, land is very expensive. And likewise, I'm sure in St. Croix. And it's really hard to be able to start a farm as a first generation farmer and find access to ground. Um, you know, when we did this, I put, the effort I put into my home farm, I put into the site. And MG&E was Madison Gas and Electric. They were very impressed by our efforts. And now they ask me about grazing before they consider mowing at some of the sites throughout the community. So, now that we've been solar grazing a few years, our farm is hustling and bustling. We're running around. We're satisfying the contracts. We're keeping our sheep healthy. We've expanded a 56-acre farm to now 300 acres by the end of the summer. We're the only Wisconsin-based multi-solar grazing operation in the state. We offer services beyond grazing like erosion stabilization work, post-construction. We do mowing, we do herbicide treatments, and other services that are needed. We regularly partner with UW-Madison on research opportunities. We host researchers at our farm for water quality testing, animal veterinary care, forage analysis at sites, and other opportunities to advance solar grazing, but also some of the other agricultural research projects that the students are working on. We're the third largest user of virtual fencing in the world, utilizing no fence GPS collars. And we're on pace, if we're not, the largest sheep farm in the state. I like to call ourselves a FRAFO or a free range animal feeding operation. Unlike a CAFO, our sheep graze and move across the landscape. They stay healthier and it limits the impacts to the environment by moving daily. But enough about us. Let's talk about the sheep. The sheep are the ones, the star of the show. Solar sites need vegetation to stabilize the soils, but they need vegetation maintained to prevent panel shading, which has been mentioned. And sheep are excellent at consuming vegetation. They are natural grazers, so they chew from the top down, and they consume vegetation in areas where mowers can't go or where mowers and workers with trimmers have a really hard time reaching. Large mowing equipment tends to compact soils, making water run across the soil instead of filtering through it. Sheep are very low impact and contribute to a buildup of healthy soils without contributing to compaction and other problems like with thatch buildup and that kind of thing, as seen with mowing. Sheep, unlike goats, they don't climb the top of panels or chew on wires. They're small enough that they won't damage panels if they come in contact with them incidentally. And sheep, I've noticed they graze best in the shade. They're wrapped in wool, so they love to be under the shade, the shaded panels in very hot summer conditions. It's the perfect type of habitat for them to grow and to be healthy and to stay comfortable. Shepherds, we excel at keeping our sheep healthy, safe, and we understand how to grow and maintain forage for our sheep. And having farmers work solar sites offers somebody who understands how to manage not just the vegetation, but understands soils and water and everything that's needed to sustain not just the animals that we run, but the ground that they run on. Now, for large scale solar grazing, it offers challenges, but it also offers a lot of opportunities too. Wisconsin, we have really productive soils and it offers abundant forage to sustain sheep, or any other type of livestock. But contracting to maintain the vegetation needs to be carefully planned. And the animal expertise to execute those contracts is critical. It's keeping the sheep healthy and making sure to adhere to the contracts. The biggest consideration for us as grazers when we evaluate a site of whether we should graze it or not is the type of vegetation that's planted. Sheep thrive on, a typical forage, but they also thrive on a pollinator site. That's like a smorgasbord of different types of plants that offer various nutritional benefits. And, not all pollinator species are equal in the eyes of a hungry sheep, though. And that's why it's important to work with the local shepherds for the seed mix to use on site. The biggest, I think, challenge for running a large herd, large flock is overwintering. It can work on a large site like 10 Mile Creek, but a farm would need to be located near the site, and maybe multiple operations spread across the site might work best. Having access to areas in the site for haymaking would certainly help save feed costs over the winter. Sheep are very winter hardy, wrapped in their wool coats, but they need to stay dry and they need to stay out of the wind. And having access to barns or other types of covered shelters in the vicinity would be essential. But most importantly, though, is the timing of the lambing schedule to enhance the grazing efforts rather than the annual spikes in lambing prices or lamb prices. And especially of note is how to balance the pollinator habitat, but also what the sheep need at certain periods of time in their life cycle. So that's the kind of thing that we have done a really good job. We did a pilot project starting last year, and how to maintain a pollinator site using sheep, and the results were incredible. So we passed with flying colors from the environmental team, but also some of the other environmental teams from other utilities thought that our site was very well maintained. So we're looking forward to adding more acreage as it relates to pollinator habitat. I would say the biggest challenge to do large scale grazing efforts isn't necessarily finding enough sheep. I had somebody from UW Extension say, yeah, you would never be able to find enough sheep to cover that much ground. And I said, finding sheep isn't the problem. It's finding the shepherds that can do it effectively, but with the animal's health as a primary focus. Anybody can just buy sheep and dump them in a solar site. That's not good for them. It's not good for the sheep. It's not good for the shepherds, and it's not good for maintaining the vegetation. It takes careful planning. It takes some individual that understands how to evaluate different types of forages, but also to pick up the subtleties of any prevailing health issues that are affecting the flock. You know, when it comes down to it, sheep can supplant landscapers, but only with the right shepherd. For us, we're a little different too. I did a ASGA presentation. ASGA is the American Solar Grazers Association, about incorporating technology. Like I said before, we're the third largest user of virtual fencing in the world. We use collars that much like a you'd have on your pet dog at home. The sheep are amazing and very intuitive when it comes to collar technology. So it's been really cool to watch them, and we are able to graze them. We're able to move them every day through the site, and it not just results in a better opportunity for them to graze. We're finding greater weight gains in our lambs, but also it keeps them healthier to keep them off of ground that may be where they shed parasites. And likewise, when it comes to the actual contracting, we find that we can actually move the sheep through the site and maintain the vegetation better than if we just send them out in a mob graze fashion where we send 300 sheep out on a 30-acre site for a week and then pull them off. This has been something that's been really cool to watch. So, I'll leave it there. I didn't want to go too far into this, but I thanks for the opportunity to share, a little bit about our story about solar grazing. I'll take a look at the chat here and see if I can find any questions. Nothing for me. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Bo. We really appreciate you sharing your experience. It's wonderful. Yeah, so that opens us up to questions. You're welcome to drop them in the chat or use the raise hand feature. I did see one from Kevin that we need to address in the chat, asking about who the manufacturer is for the panels and where they come from. Along with where are they already installed, which I'm not sure what that part means. But that was during Mary Beth's presentation. So I don't know, Kevin, if that was asking about One Energy's solar panels or for Excel's for this solar project. But Mary Beth, if you know the sourcing for the panels for your projects.
Yeah, so I'm pretty far separated from our procurement department. So I don't actually know off the top of my head that information, but I can get that info to you if you are really curious. I just would need to like dive into a couple of documents. I'm more of like a plant person. But we do work with a couple of main construction contractors, and we usually source the panels and then we contract out our construction through Hunt, Westfall, or some previous people we've worked with. And what was the other question about siting? It was so we permit, develop, and then contract construction for all our projects. So we're a developer first, and then we're committed to like keeping all of our sites in dual use, making sure land is in production while there's solar energy. So We do permit our projects, we develop them, we design them, we have engineers in-house who design, and then we have a real estate team who finds like ideal like sites for solar to be built. So then we establish like the seed mix on the sites after they're built. So we do the whole process. If that, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Tara, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I'm in the PSD docket right now because Excel has submitted a preliminary engineering plan. I can post that in the chat, but they do have a description of the panels that they'll use. They're calling them 630 watt JA solar PV modules that they'll have in the primary project area. So I'm going to pop that link into the chat if anybody wants to do further research on the 10-mile project specifically.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara. And it looks like Kevin is interested in more information on the sourcing of your panels, Mary Beth, if you are able to look into that more. Yeah, I think we've covered most of what has come up here, and that puts us right at 7:30. Folks are welcome to follow up, if you have further questions. But we want to thank you guys all so much for joining us tonight and engaging in our community conversation about the solar development that's happening in your county. I want to thank as well, again, all of our speakers for sharing your knowledge and expertise tonight. I think these are really important conversations to have, and I'm really glad to see this interest and participation from folks. So look out in your email for the recording that we'll send over, as well as the slides and future events that we'll have down the line. So thank you guys again.
Thanks, everyone. If Kevin is still on, I can, if you want to email me at vegetation@OneEnergy, I can get you info. Otherwise, yeah, happy to share stuff. But I'm gonna head out. I gotta go. Thanks, y'all.